This is our first YouTube live this morning. I want to talk about exactly how we lost our rights. So this is the history of our country, and I'm going to go into really deep analysis today. I'm going to go into very deep and specific analysis in understanding exactly how we created the prison industrial complex. This line right here is the prison industrial complex. Take a look at it. And so I want to just explain to you guys a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing here. I teach the history, the origins of Lawz. I teach how we have the prison industrial complex and how all of these people have been legally departed from our country, and the police go home and go to bed. And then they'll say stupid shit like I have the right to go home safe to my family after either you kill someone, you assist in killing someone, or you take them to the dungeon and you ruin their lives. And so what I'm going to talk about today in extraordinary detail, I'm going to leave an extraordinary detailed analysis of Harry Anslinger and how he created the modern prison industrial complex of which we live in today. He had a very large hand in doing that. And exactly how did he do that? How did Harry Anslinger create the modern prison system that we live in today? How did he do that? Why do we have this industrial prison system? Well, I'll give you a hint. It has to do with this Supreme Court holding from 1968 called Terry versus Ohio. And this is the linchpin of death in our country is Terry versus Ohio. Because if I take the stick and I just put it here, there's Terry versus Ohio there. Now take a look at the prison industrial complex. So this creates our prison industrial complex. So then you say, well, how did we get to the Terry versus Ohio? Well, we got there through Harry Anslinger and Prohibition. You wouldn't even think it. You wouldn't think that Harry Anslinger would be the guy who created this modern day prison system of which we're forced to live in today, but he did. Harry Anslinger is going to be born, and I was kind of giving this lecture earlier on TikTok before my account got suspended for no reason, but Harry Anslinger creates the modern prison system. He's born in 1892. So let's kind of discuss what's going on in our country in 1892, and he's born in Pennsylvania. So this is the man and the reason why, if there's a hell, I certainly hope that he's burning in it, because this man ruined our country. Him with the help of Richard Nixon, these two guys together, they literally are spawns of Satan. So Richard Nixon and Harry Anslinger created the prison system that we live in today. This man is born in 1892 in Altoona, Pennsylvania. So here's 1892 right here. You see this? I'll try to zoom in a little bit. So Harry Anslinger was born in 1892, and then by 1902, what's going on in America is we're in the height of lynching season. That's when the most lynchings are going on in America. So he's 1892 to 1902. That's the worst lynchings ever. And he's in Pennsylvania, and a lot of lynchings are going on in Pennsylvania. So he learns a certain brand of racism that you and I would never be able to understand. We would never be able to understand the amount of racism that this guy held in his heart. But really what he held in his heart the most was for money. He was born to a family of like 9 kids or 10 kids, and he's the second youngest or the youngest of 9 or 10 kids. And so Harry, when he's born in 1892, he attends lynchings. This man goes to lynchings in Pennsylvania before he's 10 years old. So that's the brand of racism that he learned, sadly. And so he hates black and brown people. He absolutely hates them, but he loves money more than he has hatred. And so I'm going to get into the details of that now. So what happens specifically? Harry Anslinger is going to go to World War I, which I have listed right here, because he's 22 years old when World War I starts. But where does he go to war at? He goes over to The Hague. He goes over to The Hague, which is what? Headquarters for the World Health Organization and headquarters for what's going to be called the League of Nations. So he makes his connections at The Hague in the Netherlands. And who are his connections? His connections are the World Health Organization and the League of Nations. And what is the League of Nations? It's a bunch of industrialized democratic countries that are going to band together to create laws and economic prosperity for the ultra elite. That's what Harry Anslinger does. And so now right here in 1914, in 1911, Standard Oil is going to be broken up. Standard Oil is going to be broken up in 1911, and who's going to lead the charge on that? And if you guys zoom in real close on your wall graphic, if you have a wall graphic, come right down here, you can see that right here on the timeline are all the presidents. So William Howard Taft is going to be the final guy who gets Standard Oil broken up. And so William Howard Taft is going to take credit for breaking up Standard Oil, but he really didn't do it. He really didn't do it. That charge was led by Theodore Roosevelt. However, because Theodore Roosevelt's administration was just plagued with scandals, he does not get the credit he deserves for breaking up Standard Oil. And so now when you come down here and you take a look and you say, well, what was going on in our country? What was going on in our country was Harry Anslinger, who had worked on the railroad from the time he was 15 years old, he created a connection with the J.D. Rockefeller company called Standard Oil. Now, J.D. Rockefeller's company is going to be broken up in 1911. But that doesn't mean that J.D. Rockefeller is still not the chairman of the board, because he is. They're going to break it up into 7 different subsidiaries, but that does not mean that J.D. Rockefeller is not turning a gigantic profit from Standard Oil being broken up. People think that J.D. Rockefeller's company being broken up in 1911 hurt him. No, it didn't. It made him more money. It made him more powerful. Because when you break up Standard Oil into the 7 different subsidiaries, now you have a group of elite rich white men, and I'm sorry I have to say those words, but it's true. And so these guys, the elite rich white people, they're going to pass the 1914 Harrison Act right at the beginning of World War I. So when veterans are coming back from the war in 1914, 1915, 1916, and they have PTSD, they now have to get their prescription from their doctor. That's what the 1914 Harrison Act actually does. This is the birth of Big Pharma. Because if you have to get a prescription from your doctor, then that's going to create an organization that has to get that prescription. Okay? Do you understand that? So when you break up Big Pharma, when you break up Standard Oil, that creates the 1914 Harrison Act. How does that work, people? How does that work specifically? How does the breakup of the Standard Oil Company in 1911 create the 1914 Harrison Act? The way it happens is because these guys don't want a hemp industry. They don't want the hemp industry to take on Lamont DuPont's pharmaceutical industry and William Randolph Hearst's fossil fuel industry and newspaper industry. And that's exactly how this happens. This is the breakup of Standard Oil that completely and utterly ruins our country. For big capital, for big pharma, and for fossil fuels. And so the 1914 Harrison Act, it doesn't really have any teeth. It doesn't really have any teeth. And then what happens in 1920, we have prohibition. And prohibition completely and utterly decimates our country. If you didn't know this, and this is where I'm truly an expert, is on the prison system. What I study the most is the prison system because my father spent 20 years in prison. Okay, my father spent 20 years in prison, and that forced me to study the prison industrial complex from the time I was just a young tyke. And so if you take a look, 1920, and just drop straight down on the wall graphic here, and there's the first spike in the prison industry. People will say that the prison industry was created in 1865 after slavery is officially abolished with the 13th Amendment, because you have slavery in your Freedom Amendment, and the 13th Amendment is going to say that slavery is abolished in America unless you're convicted of a crime. And then, of course, you can be a slave in the United States of America, which is absolutely preposterous. We have slavery in our Freedom Amendment. Okay, so now as you guys really take a look in here and you start to dig in and you start to understand the truth. So they say that we started the prison industrial complex with the 13th Amendment in 1865, but it's just not true. If you study the prison industrial complex, which is not hard to do, it's available online for free for you. We create, North Carolina's famous for creating prisons to lock up black people, but the truth is we're not locking up black people, we're locking up white people. Black people have a very simple choice. Either you go back to work in the plantation or the house, or you face the lynchings. That's how it works. That's exactly how it works. So the prison industrial complex, while they may have built prisons in the South with the 13th Amendment, they don't put black people in those prisons. As a matter of fact, the prison population is 85% white people all the way up until the 1940s, 1950s. And that happens here. This little spike right here is in 1954. Now, each one of these lines represents 100,000 human beings who are going to go to a dungeon and live in a dungeon. So the building of the prison industrial complex is not for black people, it's for white people. And the reason why it's for white people is because the biggest bootleggers in America are police. You guys, maybe you've heard of Al Capone or Lucky Luciano, but they didn't hold a candle to the cops. The cops were the biggest distributors of alcohol in America. And we know this because Herbert Hoover orders the Wickersham Commission in 1929. It comes out in 1931 and 1932. You cannot read the entire Wickersham Commission. I give it away for free all the time. I give away an excerpt of it for free all the time. I send out 100 emails a day to people who want to read the 3 police commissions. And oh, by the way, please don't be offended, but if you have not read the 3 police commissions, you absolutely don't know shit about policing. You may be an auditor, you may be someone who records cops. If you haven't read the Wickersham Commission, if you haven't read the 1972 Knapp Commission, and if you haven't, especially if you have not read the 1994 Mullen Commission, then you don't know a damn thing about policing. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. But it's true. It is 100% a fact. Okay? Yeah, the Kennedys sure did. As a matter of fact, if you go, I don't want to get distracted. I can go into long distance. So any person who's on this wall, if there's a picture of this person on the wall, I can go into their history, their biography. I can tell you every detail of every single person who's on this wall, including the people who've been legally departed by the police in our country. Okay? So here's what happens. Now I'm going to stay real focused the best that I can. So we create the prison industrial complex based on prohibition. And how does prohibition come to pass? Prohibition comes to pass based on a mandate. You guys are hearing that word a lot in history right now, mandate, mandate, mandate. Well, the mandate is passed, and I believe it's called the Volstead Act. It's called the Volstead Act of 1920, which transforms into the 18th Amendment. And then for the first time in American history, we build the industrial prison complex. And so what do I mean when I say the industrial prison complex? Well, take a look at the prison industry. In 1920, we're just about 40,000 people in prison. By 1934, we have over 200,000 people in prison. That's 5 times the amount of people are going to prison. And why are that many people going to prison? Because of a mandate. And by the way, just so you know, this gentleman right down here, his name's Woodrow Wilson. He definitely was not a great person. He was really kind of rough around the edges. However, you know what he did? He actually vetoed prohibition. He vetoed it. When the 18th Amendment came to pass in 1920, Woodrow Wilson said, I'm going to veto that, guys. I can't have that. He vetoes the 18th Amendment, and Congress, who we vote for, they overrule Woodrow Wilson. They overrule him. And because you know why? The people of America are for a mandate. Have you ever heard that before? Did you know that? Did you know that because the people had been convinced that criminalizing alcohol in 1920 would make the world a better place, the people actually, they want the Congress to override the executive, and they do. Welcome to knowledge. Welcome to understanding. When the people are on the side of a mandate, it ruins our country. And we create a prison industrial complex based on a mandate. Okay? So that's the way it is. So when you hear the word mandate, throughout the history of time, and I can go all the way back to the Byzantine Empire and the Romans, and I can go all the way back to the Spanish Inquisitions. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you know about the Spanish Inquisitions? How well did mandates work out where you had to become Christian? How well did that work out? It didn't. So now when we build the prison industrial complex, who's getting locked in prisons? White people, Italians, and Irish. So the prison industrial complex, when it jumps 5-fold, we're putting in Italians and Irish. That's what's going on. So what else is prohibition going to do? Prohibition is going to begin the exigent circumstances clause. And you guys, maybe you've heard some of my lectures previously, but the exigent circumstances clause is based on what? Alcohol prohibition. The 1925 case of Carroll versus the United States here, as you can see, I have some tape on here. Carroll versus the United States is based on an Oklahoma prohibition law. The Carrolls are bootleggers, and they're running alcohol along with the cops. The cops are the buyers, the cops are the sellers. The Wickersham Commission clearly outlines that the cops are the biggest alcohol pushers there are. This is the reason why the FBI is started in 1924, along with anti-Americanism, communism. That's why J. Edgar Hoover is going to be the head of the FBI. The FBI is going to start in 1924, and it's going to continue with J. Edgar Hoover at the head of the FBI for 50 years. And how come he's at the head of the FBI for 50 years? Why is that? How come J. Edgar Hoover stays at the head of the FBI for 50 years? Because he can tap right into your phone lines. So this gentleman has dirt on every single person in America. He is one of the biggest pigs in American history, J. Edgar Hoover. He was also gay, and then what he did is he tortured gay people all the way up until the 1969 Stonewall riots in New York City. And finally, in 1969, at the Stonewall riots, gay people are going to take their rights back from the government and say, we're allowed to be gay. This is and maybe you guys have heard of the Pride Parade. That starts in the 1969 Stonewall riots. So I'm just dumping out my brain here today, guys. I'm just dumping out my brain. I'm teaching you guys exactly what I know about history. And so now right here, we have the beginning of the prison industrial complex, and that's based on prohibition. But prohibition is passed, why? Because of a mandate that starts in 1820 by the Temperance Society. It's a bunch of elitists. And so then right here, when we pass this mandate, what happens when a mandate is passed? The procedure of law is more important than the substantive rights of your Bill of Rights. Everything that John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Montesquieu taught is bastardized based on a mandate. And it just pisses me off beyond belief. You can hear that I start to get angry because I've read John Locke's philosophy. I've read Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophy. I've read Montesquieu's book, The Spirit of Lawz. And I understand that the Spirit of Lawz is published in 1850 in French and in 1852 in English. And then I know that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, they plagiarized Montesquieu's book. And the plagiarization leads to the checks and balances system that we have in government today. That's Montesquieu's book, The Spirit of Lawz. If you're unfamiliar with Montesquieu's book, The Spirit of Lawz, it's available for free on YouTube. You can listen to it. Don't think it's easy to listen to, because it's not. You have to really listen. And then the Federalist Papers are written back and forth from when? From 1763 all the way up until 1776. We have 10 or 12 years of these guys writing letters called the Federalist Papers. If you haven't read the Federalist Papers, they're available on YouTube for free. You can listen to them as you read along. And so now we got a mandate pushed by 1850 where the Temperance Society, and by the way, Susan B. Anthony was part of the Temperance Society, who was a big part of ending slavery. If you haven't read the 1852 book called Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, there's a book recommendation for you. Okay, so now as we push forward, the mandate comes through in 1920, and the most important thing in America is that a mandate's been passed, and that's the most important thing. And so this is really going to empower Big Pharma, right, and Big Government and Big Brother. Because then when the Carrolls are arrested in 1925 for bootlegging alcohol, they're selling alcohol to who? To cops. Cops are the biggest alcohol drug runners there are, period. So then you have the FBI started in 1924. Do you see the police state being created? Do you see the police state being created? And this is all based on a mandate, my friends. This is all based on a mandate. So now in 1925, because we're in Prohibition from 1920 to 1934, we create the Exigent Circumstances Clause. Well, what does the Exigent Circumstances Clause actually say? That if the police are in hot pursuit of you, if the police believe there's going to be a loss of life, if the police believe they need to seize evidence off of you, well then that's going to go ahead and circumvent your Bill of Rights. All philosophy of law is wiped away based on the 1925 case of Carroll versus the United States. Did you know that? Have you ever heard that before? Did you know that the basis of the police state is based on the 1925 Carroll case out of Oklahoma? That the Supreme Court hears. And which Supreme Court hears? It's the Taft Court. And what kind of man is Howard Taft? He's a piece of garbage. Howard Taft is as bad as all of them. He is literally a piece of walking dog. Howard Taft, just so you know, let's give a little history of Howard Taft. In 1899, Howard Taft is going to go over to the Philippines and he's going to create rape camps and concentration camps all through the Philippines from 1899 all the way up until he's president. Matter of fact, when they call him, I'll zoom in here for you guys so you guys can take a look here. When they call William Howard Taft and say, hey, we want you to be president, and they call him in 1902, 1903, and they say, we want you to run for president. Can you be President Taft? He says, no, guys. My work in the Philippines is too important. William Howard Taft was governor of the Philippines, and he's an American white dude. How can William Howard Taft be governor of the Philippines in 1899 until 1903, 1904, when he's a white guy? Because he's setting up concentration camps in the Philippines. Do you understand? Our entire basis of our country is based on imperialism, authoritarianism, and racism. And what's the biggest authoritarianism is the mandate of prohibition. So a little bit of background on William Howard Taft there. He's in the Philippines creating rape camps, creating concentration camps, and literally torturing and murdering Filipinos. By the way, we fail. I say we because it's America, but I don't mean we because I would never be a part of that. He literally rapes, kills, and murders tens of thousands of Filipinos. And he's called the governor. When they call him to be president in 1903, he says, I can't. My work in the Philippines is too important. So now, as we move forward, William Howard Taft is going to be right there during Prohibition. And how do we know that the police are the biggest? I said the police are the biggest alcohol dealers that there are. Because in the 1928 case of Olmsted versus the United States, which is brought forth by who? J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover, what he's done with the FBI in 1924 is tap into Roy Olmsted's phone lines. Because back then you could just go right into the phone company and tap directly into Roy Olmsted's phone line. And so he listens in on his phone conversations. Well, let me just tell you something. That's a violation of your Fourth Amendment right to be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and it shall not be violated. Your effects are your cell phone. Your effects are your dog, your cat, your bird. Your effects are your car. And so William Howard Taft, in the Olmsted case of 1927 here, in the Olmsted case of 1928 right here, what William Howard Taft, when he's so he's been president, this piece of garbage, has been president from 1909 to 1913. And so then when he's on the Supreme Court, appointed, by the way, he didn't just get the job, he was appointed. And so now he's head of the Supreme Court. This man, if you could go back in time and he was a baby in the crib, I swear to God, if there was a cliff nearby, I would throw him over and just not listen to the screams because he was such a piece of shit. You have no idea. This is one of the worst people I've ever researched in U.S. history. I literally hate him. Forgive me. So when William Howard Taft hears the Olmsted case of 1928 right here, he says, he literally writes the opinion, civil liberties be damned. Roy Olmsted is a Seattle police lieutenant. He's a Seattle police lieutenant. And you can read all about it in the Wickersham Commission that the police are the biggest alcohol runners there are. You may have heard of Capone and Lucky Luciano. They didn't hold a candle to the cops running alcohol. They didn't hold a candle. It wasn't even close. The cops are the biggest runners of alcohol like they are today. They're the biggest drug dealers, the biggest pimps are police today. It's still the same thing. Nothing's changed. Only now it's tongue-in-cheek. We don't talk about the cops that are drug dealers, which, by the way, in the 1994 Mullen Commission, there's a section called Cops as Drug Dealers. There's a section called Police Protecting Narcotics Dealers. The police are involved in the alcohol and drug gangs today more than they were all the way back in the Wickersham Commission of 1931. By the way, you can't read the entire Wickersham Commission because it's like 26, 28 volumes. It's like reading War and Peace a half a dozen times. That's how big it is. That's how many cops are involved in it. So this piece of shit, he taps into Roy Olmsted's phone conversations, and then Howard Taft upholds the holding, upholds the court ruling, and says, no, civil liberties be damned. He literally says those words. And I don't like Roy Olmsted because he's a PIG, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have your basic civil liberties. And so they strip you of your civil liberties in 1928 based on prohibition. So now you can see what's going on here. What's going on? This is all of the authoritarian rule that we live in today. It's passed during the mandate of prohibition. That's why today's mandates are absolutely terrifying, because we're going to go into another system of oppression and violence. 1 out of 6 people in America from 1920 to 1934 are going to be hurt, injured, or imprisoned or killed by the alcohol gangs, which are mostly cops. Okay? So now right here, let me back this camera up a little bit. So now let me go into the Carroll case a little bit, because the Carroll case directly ties to the 1914 Harrison Act and directly ties to the breakup of Standard Oil in 1911. Okay? So now when you get to the breakup of Standard Oil in 1911, what exactly happens? Well, what happens is the 1914 Harrison Act comes out 3 years later, and you know what's added into it? Marijuana. They call it cannabis back then. They changed the name to marijuana because Harry Anslinger hates Mexicans, and he knows that he can brand marijuana being bad if Mexicans are going to sleep with white women. It's all based on this purity thing that we have to have the purity of the different races. Everything that we know about is based on sex and this racism and authoritarianism and big pharma. If you didn't know that, now you do. So now here's what happens. So the exigent circumstances clause says that if the police say these things, that's why we have a Bill of Rights, a bill that cannot be ever taken down. But because the people have pushed through the mandate through Congress, and they've overrode Woodrow Wilson. That means that 6 out of 10 people, or 6 out of 10 voters, they want the mandated prohibition. They need the mandated prohibition. They've been brainwashed by their government that the mandate's going to make the world a better place. Ask the people in the Spanish Inquisitions if mandates make the world a better place. And so now right here, the birth of the prison industrial complex. And it's filled with white people. It's filled with Irish. It's filled with Italians. And so now this here is going to be, as you guys know, if it's your first time in my channel, what I always talk about is what? Terry versus Ohio. Here's the stick right there. Look at the stick. Now look at the prison line. Look what happens after Terry. Why does that happen? It happens because of another exigent circumstances. John Terry just standing on the side of the road, he poses an exigent circumstance because there could be a loss of life. Did you know that? Have you heard that before? I'll bet you haven't. I'll bet it's your first time. And the reason why is because the government doesn't want you to know this information. They don't want you to be educated. They don't want you to know that we got to go back to 1925 and remove exigent circumstances. I don't want cops coming on my property whether there's a loss of life or not. Have a ham sandwich, okay? I don't want you coming on my property. I don't want cops on my property, period. I don't give a damn if you think there's a loss of life. I don't give a damn if you say you're in hot pursuit. And I don't give a damn if you think you need to seize evidence. And why is seize evidence on there? How come that's on there? How come the cops can go around your rights, around your Bill of Rights that are based on hundreds of years of philosophy, based to seize evidence off of you? Well, because there's a mandate passed in 1920. There's a mandate, okay? Okay, so now right here, now this case here, this is exigent circumstance clause. This is the beginning of tyranny. That's why there's a red box around it. This is why we lost all of our rights right here. Because then exigent circumstances is going to carry on, and I'm going to go into great detail here in a moment. But I first want to get into the big pharma spin of how we truly lose all of our rights. Listen, if you guys you want to get a copy of my digital poster, please go by my website, Delete Lawz. You can get an exact replica of my digital poster. It's on DeleteLawz.com with a Z, DeleteLawz.com with a Z. If you learn anything from me, please go ahead and pick me up a cup of coffee. These are my cup of coffee funds right here. Please pick me up a cup of coffee. I do appreciate it. If you're broke, don't worry about it. Just send me a message through my website and I'll send this to you for free, the digital download. If you want to get a really high-end quality one, I pre-bought 100 of these. They're sitting in Santa Monica. And this is a high-end laminated one, and they mail it to you. So the sun's coming in now from the garage. But this is where you guys can get it. And this is dope. I mean, this is truly dope. By the way, this took 20 years of research for me to be able to put this together for you guys. It took 20 years of research for me. 20 years. 20 years I've been researching since they no-knock raided me in 2002 when they kicked my door down. Oh, they kicked my door down in 2002 based on exigent circumstances. Did you know that? I don't want to get lost on myself here, but because it's easy when you've been no-knock raided to get lost on your feelings and how you feel. I want to stay focused on teaching you guys because I want to post this video. Okay, so now here's what happens. When we get the Harrison Act, and then right here we get the Prohibition Act, what does Harry Anslinger see? What does he see? That if we create a mandate and create laws that are based on the idea that we criminalize a chemical, well then we build a prison industrial complex. But who does he hate the most? He hates black people and brown people and Asian people. He's a devout racist. He really, truly is. If you study his life, he's a garbage piece of crap. I used to say garbage man, but garbage men actually work very hard for their money and they do a very good service for our country. He's not even worth being called garbage people are good people, but he's a garbage person. He's a garbage human being. And so here's what happens. Here's what happens here. Do I have any questions here? I don't know how to pull up the questions. I was already in thought that we need a revolution. No, we don't need a revolution. We need to keep talking. Jason, we need to keep talking to one another. I'm just seeing where I can pull comments up here. I'm so sorry I didn't see this. Okay, Jason, good to see you. Filthy Fingers, good to see you. Cop Block, Hot Springs. Every once in a while, oh, I see. If I put my finger on here, then I can see how many comments are. Okay, here's your comments. If anybody has any questions, now I've learned how to pull up comments. If anybody has any questions, now I've learned how to pull up comments. So if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up because now I got the comments on the screen. I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't see this. Okay. So now Harry Anslinger, what has he seen? He's seen that if we create we've created the prison industrial complex, so now we got a place to put people. And no, what happens here is absolutely amazing. This will set you back on your chin to your neck when I tell you this information. You can get it on DeleteLawz.com with a Z. You can get it on DeleteLawz.com with a Z. Listen, it's $135. I'm sorry it's so expensive. I really am. But it's the best paper. It's the best ink, and from the best printing company in Santa Monica, California. So in 1934, I'm sorry I don't have it on here, you have the Uniform State Narcotic Act. So this is going to be based on the enforcement clause of the 1914 Harrison Act. It's called the Uniform State Narcotic Drug Act. The Uniform State Narcotic Act. So remember, all of the states in the Union, okay? All of the states in the Union have just gone through 13 years of prohibition, so they're all a little weary of passing the Uniform State Narcotic Act. However, Harry Anslinger is extraordinarily influential, and he wants the Uniform State Narcotic Act to go nationwide because he wants to criminalize hemp. He doesn't want hemp to compete with who? His father-in-law. Andrew Mellon, he has a daughter and she's a babe. And so Harry Anslinger, who's appointed the head of the Federal Narcotics Agency in 1930, he marries Andrew Mellon's daughter. And Andrew Mellon has diversified his money into Lamont DuPont and William Randolph Hearst. And so now Harry Anslinger has a vested interest in making sure that cannabis can never compete with the pharmaceutical industry and with the fossil fuel and paper industry. And as you know, William Randolph Hearst was big into paper. That's how he made a lot of his money, through the newspapers, and he bought all the trees to cut up to put into the paper. Well, hemp grows a new stock of trees every single summer. In one summer, you can replace everything William Randolph Hearst has done in one summer. And so what Harry Anslinger singularly focused on is criminalizing cannabis. And so when he marries Andrew Mellon's daughter and they pass the 1934 State Narcotics Act, in 1937, in the year 1937, they passed the Marijuana Tax Act. And why is it called the Marijuana Tax Act and why it's not a criminal code? Well, because that's what Andrew Mellon can get done as Secretary of Treasury. He's the Secretary of Treasury. That's what he can get done. I mean, it's pretty simple to look back on history and understand that. So now, when the Federal Narcotics Agency is started in 1930 and Harry Anslinger is courting Andrew Mellon's daughter, he's going to marry her. And then here's the real key that a lot of people simply don't know. They don't study history far enough. When Harry Anslinger marries Andrew Mellon's daughter and then they pass the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, Andrew Mellon dies that year. The Marijuana Tax Act is passed in May. He dies in October. So now, who is heir to the throne of Andrew Mellon's millions? He's been a cop since he was 15 working on the railroad. And now by 1937, now he's 45 years old. Okay? He's 45 years old and he's inherited Andrew Mellon's fortune. And so now, man, he's going to step it up. Now the State Narcotics Drug Act from 1934 is beginning to be adopted by all the states across the Union. And why is that? How come that is? Because Harry Anslinger is pushing each and every state to criminalize cannabis, to make sure you arrest people for cannabis. He's creating films like Reefer Madness. He's listed in his Wikipedia as an actor. He's not. He should be listed as a criminal. So now that Andrew Mellon has died after he's passed the Marijuana Tax Act, now from right here, here's what's going to happen. Marijuana Tax Act passes here. Now he goes on a crusade to criminalize marijuana. So then you're going to get the 1952 Boggs Act. But that's not truly the end of freedom for America. When he passes, in 1961, in Manhattan, New York, in 1961, Harry Anslinger has a convention called the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. And who does he invite? He invites his friends from The Hague. Who are they now? They're the World Health Organization. Maybe you guys have heard of this before, the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization is going to come in and give a speech in 1961 at the Single Convention on Narcotics Drugs upon Harry Anslinger's request, and the World Health Organization says marijuana will turn your kid into an axe murderer. That marijuana can turn you insane with one puff. Matter of fact, the World Health Organization recommends that all marijuana plants are eradicated from the earth within 25 years. That by the year 1986, all marijuana plants should be eradicated from planet Earth. Did you know that? Have you ever heard that before? Anybody ever taught you that? The World Health Organization. along with the FDA. On my old wall, I used to have a bunch of notes right here, but so I'll just have to take my word for some of the things I'm saying today. And so now right here at the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, this is the introduction of the World Health Organization as being the national global player, the global player. The World Health Organization is empowered by Harry Anslinger, the same garbage organization today pushing for mandates and vaccinations. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. So now the prison industrial complex is starting to soar. Now we're at 300,000 people. Now we're at 300,000 people right here. What's the year? Pop up right here. We're in 1954. So now we've gone from a prison population in 1929 at 40,000 people to a prison population of 300,000 people just in 1954. 1961 at the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, Harry Anslinger invites a bunch of countries from where? Where is it from? From the League of Nations. The League of Nations that J.D. Rockefeller has bought off. He's paid them all off. This guy lives to be 99 years old, 98 years old. He would be better off if he'd been killed in the crib. And so now right here at the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, the World Health Organization is empowered and gets their credibility from Anslinger. And so now what's going to happen here is the 1952 Boggs Act made it so it would be a crime if you had a single seed of marijuana. You would do 10 years in prison for a joint or a seed. Well, after the Single Convention on Narcotics Drugs, when the World Health Organization says that it can turn you into an axe murderer with one puff, this is the beginning of Kerr versus California in 1963. So they're trying to chase down the Kerrs because they're marijuana dealers. And so now when they get to their house, the Kerrs who are being tailed by the cops, they're trying to get these guys for months, and they finally follow them to their house. They just get a key from the landlord and walk right into their house. And why do they walk right into their house? Because the circumstances are exigent. There's going to be a loss of life because the Kerrs are marijuana dealers. And as you know, marijuana turns you into an axe murderer or turns you comatose with one puff. And so now the police are empowered based on the holdings and the creation of the World Health Organization. And what's the whole plan? He wants to criminalize cannabis so that it doesn't compete with pharmaceuticals and the fossil fuel industry and the paper industry. And so now right here, when the Kerr versus California ruling happens, it's an extension of Brenniger versus the United States, which is an extension of Carroll versus the United States. This is the origins of law. This is the origins of law. So now here's, and let me give you you can't drive in your car or the cops can grab you based on exigent circumstances. You can't drive to your house and get to your house and be in your car because then the cops can just walk into your house. In Kerr versus California, now they can enter your house. Do you see this? Do you see the process here? And what does that do? What freedoms do you have with the Fourth Amendment? To be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects. And so now with the Carroll case and the Brenniger case and the Kerr case, now your Fourth Amendment is completely eroded down to garbage. And so now what happens here is exigent circumstances are invoked in the Kerr case, and it's based on Harry Anslinger making sure that marijuana is going to be criminalized until the end of earth. And so the exigent circumstances clause is going to continue to be used. That's what's happening today. And the World Health Organization is empowered today because of Harry Anslinger. And so now when I step back a little bit, let me zoom out a little bit. And so now what's going on? What's really going on? Someone said earlier about the Freemasons. So go to my website, DeleteLawz.com with a Z. You can get a copy of my digital poster or the laminated poster or my ebook. Thanks a lot for your support. I appreciate it. So now we talked about earlier about Freemasons. And so Earl Warren, I can give you a long dissertation on Earl Warren's history, but he's a Freemason. But the real problem is that Earl Warren is going to be the overseer of the 1962 Model Penal Code. Have you guys ever heard of the 1962 Model Penal Code? So now Earl Warren, he's going to oversee the Model Penal Code that's going to be written by Harry Blackmun. Harry Blackmun's going to be on the Supreme Court. Now we're going to get into Blackmun a little bit. He's really a disgusting white supremacist. But as we get into it, so the Model Penal Code that's going to pass in 1962 to become law from the Institute of Law, it's going to start to be written in 1952. 1952. So from 1952 till 1962, they write the Model Penal Code. They start it in 1952, they tear it up and start over in 1954. 1954 to 1959, the Model Penal Code goes through peer review in 1959. And then what happens is they pass the model penal code, which creates it a crime for you to be next to someone creating a crime. And what is that for? It's to lock up as many black people as we possibly can. That's why it's written that way. If you read the model penal code and you go through it, it's really a tough read. It's disgusting to read. So now what happens in 1962, the model penal code, it's really based on making sure you can put as many people as you possibly can in this dungeon system. That's why it's created. And so Harry Blackman is going to be the lead author of that with a guy named Harry Wexler. Henry Wexler. That's what he does. And so now right here, when you get the model penal code in 1962, that means that if you're dealing drugs and I'm next to you or I'm your friend, then I become a principal in your drug dealing. If you assault someone and I'm with you, then I become a principal in your assault. It doesn't matter if I had nothing to do with it at all. If I'm with you, the model penal code creates that. Maybe you guys have heard of the case called Justice for Latham out of Louisiana. He went to do a crime with these guys. Someone got killed. The cop killed someone else. He was charged with murder and put in prison for 60 years for the cop killing someone because of the model penal code. Okay? So this is based on what? This is based on the Freemasons. This is based on the Freemasons. And who's a Freemason? Earl Warren. He's the head of the Freemason Society. So now here's what happens here. So now this is the big, now we went down the line, and make sure you guys keep up, because without the mandate of 1920 that's going to be pushed through from 1820 in the Temperance Society, then we don't have the Carroll case, which creates exigent circumstances. Do you follow what I'm saying to you? Without the mandate, we don't have exigent circumstances. And how come the government can say that there's exigent circumstances? Because they want to. We have to overturn Carroll. That's the base of Terry. So now the Freemason Society, what they're doing is they're writing the rules and the laws of society based on their own personal perspective for control authoritarianism. That's what it's based on. And so when Harry Blackman with Harry Wexler, when they write the 1962 Model Penal Code, we'll take a look at the prison industry. What happens? It starts to rise. Because now if you're associated with someone committing a crime, you're a principal in the crime. And so now right here, as we move forward, now we're going to get to Terry versus Ohio. Now we're going to get to Terry versus Ohio. So we've completely lost all of our rights based on Carroll, Brinegar, Kerr, and Terry. And Terry is again based off exigent circumstances that John Terry is hanging around downtown Cleveland. You're not allowed to hang around downtown Cleveland in 1963 if you're a black man, especially in 1963 on Halloween Day at 2:30 in the afternoon. Okay? In 1963, if you guys have not seen Overturn Terry on this YouTube page, the first 3 episodes of Overturn Terry, you truly don't understand the Terry v. Ohio case, and you should learn it. This is how we lost our freedom. And it's based on John Terry hanging around downtown Cleveland on Halloween Day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He should have known that black people aren't allowed to hang around downtown Cleveland at 2:30 in the afternoon. By the way, this is when the black codes are being enforced. And this man here, does anybody know who this is? Martin McFadden, Officer Martin McFadden right here. He sees John Terry hanging around downtown Cleveland 1963 on Halloween Day. And he says, you know what? I don't like how he looks. Well, take a look at his face. He was mentally ill. He was literally mentally ill. Okay? You got to watch those Overturn Terry part 1, 2, and 3. You got to watch them if you really want to understand. I jump around a little bit, like nothing like I'm doing here. So it's really focused on Terry versus Ohio. So Martin McFadden, he becomes a cop in 1925. He becomes a cop in 1925. Well, let's go back and see what let's see what Martin McFadden is doing from 1925 until 1963. He's a lynchman. He's part of the lynching crew. The police are the lynchmen in America. If you didn't know that, now you do. Police are the lynchmen in our country all the way back to here. As a matter of fact, the very first police were formed in 1704, the South Carolina Rangers, and they are slave catchers. If you didn't know that, now you do. The reason why we have police in America is to catch your slave should your slave run away. And that's also the basis of tyranny, that when we create property out of people, in the 1857 case of Dred Scott versus United States, just a mere 75 years after the Bill of Rights is ratified. I think it's ratified in 1791. But the point is we get the 1776 Bill of Rights. Just 70 years later, the unelected Supreme Court, the Roger Taney Court, says that Dred Scott is property. These are Ivy League educated people who say Dred Scott is property. Do you understand that? The court's the problem. Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anybody else appointed to their job for life? Go ahead, raise your hand. Anybody else appointed to your job? How about appointed to your job for life? And throughout the history of the Supreme Court, not a single one of them have ever been impeached. Not a single one of them. However, this Freemason here, Earl Warren, he's facing impeachment. And why is he facing impeachment? How come he's facing impeachment before he passes Terry versus Ohio? Because of the Mapp versus Ohio case in 1961. The police are now picketing Earl Warren to be the first Supreme Court justice to be impeached. Because they say that you can't just go running into someone's house and violate their civil liberties, or it's called the exclusionary rule, where they're going to exclude all the evidence from the case. And so the cops are picketing him and saying, let's get rid of Earl Warren. He's a piece of shit. I can go into great detail about him, but I do it in Overturn Terry. So watch those episodes. So now right here in 68, when Martin McFadden sees him on the street and says this circumstances are exigent, he runs up and grabs him. How in the world can you run up and grab someone when you have a right to be secure in your person? Well, because the circumstances are exigent. And you have to run up and grab him because he poses a loss of life. And they got to seize evidence off him because he thinks he might have a gun. He doesn't say he has a gun. He says he thinks he might. And so now right here, with the exigent circumstances clause being invoked, and this guy here, Thurgood Marshall, it's his first year on the court, he tears apart Martin McFadden. He tears him apart and says what a loser and a bum he is. And then Thurgood Marshall votes for Terry Lawz because Earl Warren tells him to. And back then in 67, black people were just told how to vote. They were told what to do. And if they didn't do it, they might lose their seat on the Supreme Court. So now here's what happens, and here's the real crux to understanding this, and I don't think I put it in the Overturn Terry. So in 1968, April 4th of 1968, MLK Jr. is assassinated. On April 5th of 1968, Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States, meets with Earl Warren at the White House. Even though there's a separation of powers based on Montesquieu's book, The Spirit of Lawz. Montesquieu's multiple volume Spirit of Lawz. And so when these two guys collude together, what do? They say that cops got to be able to run up and grab black people and disarm them because of all the riots going on in America after Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. I want to hear the tapes. There are tapes of this meeting and I want to hear them. It happened on April 5th of 1968 at the White House. I want to know what these two bastards said. I want to know if they planned out Terry versus Ohio. That's what I want to know. So now what happens in Terry? Remember, we have this disgusting holding of exigent circumstances here. So in the Terry case right here, what's going to happen is they're going to put officer safety as the number one right in America. That officer safety is paramount. It's more important than everything else. The cops got to be safe. And by the way, this disgusting pig, he's the guy who actually makes up officer safety. They literally make up that this is about officer safety. Martin McFadden was never afraid of John Terry. He was never afraid of Childs. He was never afraid of cats. He was never afraid of these guys. But the unelected Supreme Court makes up that he was scared and you have to worry about officer safety. And so now officer safety becomes your most important right. Officer safety is number one in the books. That's how it works. And so then what happens after that? What happens after that? Now the cops can run up and grab you based on their safety and they can detain you. So what does detainment mean? Detainment meant one thing in 1968. However, if you ever hear officer safety, it's because of a Supreme Court policy, a Supreme Court holding. Every time you hear a cop say officer safety, just so you know, it's based off the 68 case of Terry versus Ohio. That puts officer safety over all of our rights. And if you don't know that, now you do. And let's just go down the line. What exactly does that mean? Officer safety is more important than your liberty. It's more important than your right to be free. You have the right to petition, but not if officer safety is on the line. You have the right to assemble, but not if officer safety is on the line. You have freedom of religion, but not if officer safety is on the line. You have a right to self-protection, but not if officer safety is on the line. And so all gun laws are created based on racist origins of law. Look that up, the racist origins of law. And then your freedom standards, your Fourth Amendment, the right for you to be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects, they're wiped away with Terry versus Ohio. They're wiped completely away from Terry versus Ohio. And then as you keep going down, you have a Fifth Amendment right to due process of law, the right to remain silent, unless the cops detain you and they put you in handcuffs. And how long are you going to last? How long are you going to last in handcuffs, huh? You have the right to remain silent unless the cops detain you and put you in torture cuffs. I'll tell you, when I was in my early 20s, I started singing like a canary. They put me in handcuffs too tight, and pretty soon they said, where are you going? Where are you going? I said, I'm not going to answer any questions. Well, pretty soon, after 5 or 10 minutes in handcuffs, I started to say, come on, man, I'm just going to my mom's house. Come on, dude, I'm just going to the beach. Come on, officer, let me go, because I'm in pain. He's put me in handcuffs that are torturing me. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to tell him where I'm going. Just get out of these goddamn handcuffs. You have the right to face your accuser unless officer safety's on the line, and then they'll grab you, put you in handcuffs, and throw you in the back of their cop car, and then parade you around for people to look at you so that your accuser can face you. You don't get to face your accuser. Cruel and unusual punishment is gone because of detainment. I told you how bad those goddamn handcuffs hurt me. How many times? 50. I've been in handcuffs 50 times. If you ever watch my audits, I literally pull up my shirt and show them I'm not carrying a weapon, which then I can tell them you have no right to touch me. You cannot Terry stop me. I've clearly identified I don't have a weapon. That means you cannot Terry stop me based on your safety. That's an important one, just so you know. So, what happens next? What happens next is Terry that puts officer safety over your rights. And during the Terry trial, they changed the meaning of arrested to detained. You can watch that on the Overturned Terry Part 1, 2, and 3 on this channel. If you haven't seen Terry Part 1, 2, and 3, I highly recommend you take a look at it. So now Terry is going to put officer safety, and it's going to change. What's the standard? What's the standard of our country? The standard of our country is that no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. What does this mean? Can you break this down for me, please? No warrant shall issue. A warrant is for your arrest. But upon probable cause, a law has been broken. So the unelected Supreme Court, these bunch of bastards up here, all of these different courts, they slowly over the years change what probable cause means. All the way to the point where some Supreme Court personnel will say, probable cause is a loose term. No, it's not. No, it is not. No, it's not. The Supreme Court bastardized it. That's what probable cause is. You have broken a law. That's what probable cause is. Supported by oath or affirmation of the victim. So you broke a law. The warrant can be issued if there's a victim supporting the law being broken by oath or affirmation. What does this mean today? I called and said that I'm reasonably suspicious of you. And now the cops can put you in detainment, which is not arrested. Our Fourth Amendment has been completely wiped away. And the reason why I get so goddamn pissed off is because it's created this, where we have millions in prison. Millions! Not a couple, millions! What does Trump say? Look at China. What does Biden say? Look at China. Look at us. Look at what we're doing to people. Look at what we're doing to people. All these people are murdered and the cops go home. And you wonder why I care so deeply. Because our country's in disarray. Everything that my grandfather went to World War I for, everything that my grandfather went to World War II for, everything that my Uncle Larry went to Vietnam for, everything that my cousins went to Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, everything that they went to war for has been bastardized because we have an unelected Supreme Court that's all. So, when this says no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, in 1968, the unelected Supreme Court changed that to reasonable suspicion. And now you can go to videos on YouTube where cops make videos called building reasonable suspicion. Building suspicion to put you in handcuffs. And you wonder why I think these guys are absolute trash. So now, when Terry v. Ohio wipes away your Fourth Amendment and changes probable cause to reasonable suspicion, now in Pennsylvania versus Mims, because officer safety is paramount, you got to get out of the car in the name of officer safety. And is it safe for you or is it safe for them? I don't know. Why don't you ask Terrence Crutcher? Why don't you ask Terrence Crutcher? Ask Terrence Crutcher, okay? I can't remember where he is on here. Ask Terrence Crutcher what it's like to get out of the car and Betty Shelby shoots him in the head on camera and he goes home. Betty Shelby now teaches classes about what to do in a high pressure situation because Terrence Crutcher is ordered out of the car from the 1977 case of Pennsylvania versus Mims, and then Betty Shelby shoots him in the back of the head with his hands up leaning against a car. And you wonder why I get pissed off. That's why. And then Illinois versus Gates, this is based on officer safety, right? It's not though. It's based on reasonable suspicion. Illinois versus Gates. Illinois versus Gates is an extension of Cortez versus the United States, which is an extension of Terry versus Ohio. So the 1969 case of Spinelli creates the Spinelli-Aguilar test, which means that police get confidential information. They have to voir dire both the confidential informant and the information before they can open an investigation on you. And this happens in 69. But then with Cortez versus the United States in 1981, the police say they can take the totalitarian circumstances of the scene. Because there's a Mexican who's bringing over people from Mexico, and so they see footprints in the sand. So they say Cortez says, well, just take a Terry and reasonable suspicion. And now we don't just need reasonable suspicion. We take the totalitarian circumstances of the scene. And so Illinois versus Gates just piggybacks on that in 83, and they supersede Spinelli-Aguilar. And so then South Dakota versus Opperman says that the police can impound your car based on officer safety, being suspicious of your car, and then they can inventory your car. And then Tennessee versus Garner, this is where Harry Blackman truly shows the piece of shit he is. He's written the model penal code in 1962 that says common law says that if you're a fleeing felon, they can shoot you in the back of the head. Then he votes against himself in 1985 and says police cannot shoot you in the back of the head as you run away unless it's for officer safety. I swear to God, that's the holding. The holding literally says in Tennessee versus Garner, it is unconstitutional to shoot you in the back as you run away unless officer safety is in question. Can you believe that? That's what it says. That's what the holding says. And the holding is supreme. It's the supremacy clause. So now it's part of our Constitution, part of our Bill of Rights. Did you know that? Have you heard that before? And so Tennessee versus Garner, Harry Blackman, who wrote the model penal code in 1962, he then votes against himself, but unless officer safety counts. And then in the 1995 holding, which is again an extension of Terry, that said police cannot no-knock raid your home. Wilson is an extension of Kerr versus California, which goes into Terry, which then goes into Wilson versus Arkansas, that says that police cannot no-knock raid your home unless they can no-knock raid your home in the name of officer safety. There's 100,000 raids a year in America. At least 20% of them are no-knock raids. And so then as we continue down the line, these two pieces of shit right here that people celebrate, they're garbage. In Arizona versus Johnson, Ruth Bader Ginsburg writes the holding, and she says, in a long-standing path-making case called Terry versus Ohio, we've already determined that if the driver is seized during a pullover, well, then all the passengers are also seized. And then in Florida versus Harris in 2013, this is if a dog barks, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's all for it. She votes for it. And she says if a dog barks, that's probable cause. Oh, is it? Oh, is it? A dog barking is probable cause. Are you sure about that? A dog barking? So the dog is swearing by oath or affirmation? The dog is writing down a piece of paper, I swear by oath or affirmation that this guy's created a victim out of me because the dog barks? Right. But we celebrate Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she's a woman. Because she's a woman. Get the f*** out of here. Go sell that garbage to someone else. I'm not interested. I'm not buying. So then in the 1996 case of Wren versus the United States, which is an extension of Terry versus Ohio, which is an extension of the exigent circumstances clause if they need to seize evidence off you or the police are in hot pursuit. In the 1996 case of Wren, again passed against a black man, they say that if the police want to pull you over because they think that maybe you might pose a loss of life, well then they can use what's called a pretextual stop, which is an extension of Terry based on reasonable suspicion. And so the police can pull you over for absolutely any reason. And then the 1925 automobile exclusionary rule, which is an extension of the exigent circumstances clause, says that they can pull you over and then search your car without a warrant on the side of the road. So in Michigan State Police, this is what creates DUI checkpoints in America. It's an extension of Terry. The cops are suspicious someone could be drunk driving down the road. You better not run away in Tennessee because they'll shoot you in the back of the head. If you get to your house, they can no-knock raid you because you ran away. If they've no-knock raided my house in 2002 based on Wilson versus Arkansas because I was teaching and fighting MMA with Chuck Liddell and they saw me go to MMA practice. And so then they said, well, the circumstances are exigent. He's dangerous. And they no-knock raided me. Uzis to my head, AR-15s to my head, laser beams at my face. So then this extends, Terry v. Ohio, which puts officer safety over our rights, it extends into Graham versus Connor that says the amount of force used against you will be determined by the reasonable officer on the scene. Because it's about officer safety, not your right to be free. Not your right to be free. And then in the 2001 case of Atwater versus City of Lago Vista, this is where the Supreme Court votes 5-4 that the police can arrest you for any infraction of the law, which really has nothing to do with Terry, but I'm just letting you know that you can be arrested for a speeding ticket. Okay? That fired me up. I didn't plan on all that. So now you have a very brief rundown of history of the United States. Now you understand some things that if we don't overturn Terry versus Ohio, we are doomed. Our country is absolutely doomed. Unless we overturn, and the reason why we go after Terry first is because we can't go back to 1925. And if you listen to Scalia's interviews on YouTube, he really gives an insight that you really cannot get without listening to his interviews. He's a piece of shit. The number one crime in America today is what? Marijuana. Is there a way to mirror this camera? I don't know if there's a way to mirror this. You guys let me know if there's a way to mirror the camera so that you guys can read what I'm showing here. So this guy, he says that you can't go back too far in time. So that means we have to start with Terry versus Ohio. We have to start with Terry. If we don't get Terry, we don't get Carroll. If we don't get Carroll, we don't get Kerr. If we don't get Kerr, we don't get Brinegar. So we have to start with Terry. This is what allows cops to grab you. To grab you. As you're just free. You're a free American. You're supposed to be free in our country. You're supposed to be able to walk down the street without the cops grabbing you. That's the point. That's the point. And that's the reason I'm so passionate about this, because I've taught MMA and I fought MMA for the past 20 years of my life. The cops have grabbed me so many times and put me in handcuffs and hurt me. They've hurt me. Do you understand that? I don't like being hurt. You're not allowed to hurt me just because I know MMA. Last I checked, I have no criminal record. Just frustrating, just super frustrating. So you guys, please go online, get a copy of my digital poster. It's only $20. If you can't afford it, I'll give it to you for free. Send me an email through DeleteLawz.com. Most of you guys can afford $20, so please, if you can, buy it. So if you guys can go buy DeleteLawz.com, pick up my digital poster. It's only $20. If you don't have the $20, I'll give it to you for free. I'll give you a bunch of documentation for free too. Everything I give away will be for free if you don't have any money. I do not charge for information if you don't have any money. Information is free. We don't get better. Remember, when we march down the street to overturn Terry, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 people marching with us won't have a dime extra in their pocket. So that's why I give away everything for free if you don't have any money. It is not a barrier to entry to work together. I will give you everything for free. These are my cup of coffee funds here, Venmo, Cash App. Take a screenshot if you would, please. Take a screenshot if you would. I do have the laminated poster in stock. Great Christmas present. It is freaking awesome. You can see the colors are just a lot better because Santa Monica, they're available now. I got 100 in stock that I bought before BLM crippled my financing. So I bought 100 in advance, otherwise it'd be $155, $160. And I can't believe how expensive the poster is. I really can't. I make about $25 on this after shipping and handling and all that bullshit. So there it is. There it is right there. Okay, thanks you guys, I appreciate it. Remember, you gotta get the police commissions from me. You can find them online, but what I did is I found them online and then I put them in a PDF file and then I paginated them and so that you guys can follow along. I give several lectures on the Mullen Commission on the YouTube page. I go over the Mullen Commission in great detail because it's so much fun to read, because everything you think about cops is validated in the Mullen Commission. Everything that you believe about police is validated in the Mullen Commission. Everything that you understand about police is validated in the Mullen Commission. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you go through the Mullen Commission. I'll send it to you today. Don't even delay. I'll send it to you. You guys don't got to give me a dime. I don't give a shit. I will give you everything I have for free. I do appreciate your support if you're in a position to support.